Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dive into a really powerful argument that kind of reframes the whole environmental discussion. We're not looking at it through the lens of politics or science alone, but through theology. It's this idea that we humans, we aren't the owners of this planet, we're its caretakers.
All right, so let's just start with the one question that's at the absolute heart of this whole perspective. Do we actually own the Earth? I mean, is it really ours to use and, exploit and then just discard however we want? How you answer that question, it pretty much changes everything.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to look at it in four key parts. We'll start with this core concept of a borrowed planet, then we'll try to define our role as stewards, confront our failures, and then, most importantly, lay out a clear three-part path forward.
Okay, first up, let's really get into this first section because it's the foundation for this whole way of thinking. It's all about understanding this principle of divine ownership. So the core idea here is it's actually really simple, but it's also profound. Since God created the world, God is its one and only true owner. We might buy and sell land, right? But according to this view, all we're ever really doing is trading the right to use it, not the ultimate title deed. At the end of the day, it's not ours. To make this super clear, the source uses a great little analogy. Just think about it like this. Imagine you borrow something you truly value from a good friend. Maybe it's their car, a favorite book, or some special tool. I mean, you wouldn't trash it or bring it back all dirty, right? Of course not. You treat it with care because it's not yours and you respect your friend, the owner. The argument is that this exact same principle of care and responsibility applies to our planet. We're basically temporary tenants here, not the landlords.
All right, so if we're not the owners, then what exactly are we? And that's what brings us to our second big idea, which is all about defining our role as managers, not masters.
Now, this is a big one. You often hear this verse from Genesis, where humanity is told to conquer the earth and rule over it. And yeah, on the surface, that sounds like a green light to just dominate, right? But the source material argues for a very, very different interpretation.
And this is where it gets really interesting. It redefines that command completely. The argument is that the original meaning of to rule isn't about unchecked exploitation for our own gain. It's the opposite, actually. It's about responsible management, creating the conditions where all life can thrive, just like a good ruler would for their kingdom.
And why do we have this special role? Well, it's all tied to this biblical concept that humans are created in God's image. But what does that even mean?
Let's be super clear here. This isn't about, a physical look-alike situation. Not at all. This image is understood as an inner capacity. It's the ability to have a relationship with God, and, this is the crucial part, the ability to act as God's representative right here on Earth. There's this fantastic ancient analogy that really makes this click. Imagine a king, right? He can't physically be in every single corner of his vast kingdom. So he'd put a statue of himself in a faraway province to represent his authority, and then he'd appoint an official to govern on his behalf. In this view, that's us. We are that official, appointed to manage the earth according to the will of the real owner. We are stewards. Okay, so this brings us to, a pretty tough question. If that's our job description, how have we been doing? This next part confronts the crisis of our mismanagement and looks at the path towards getting things right. And the source material, it really doesn't pull any punches here. It takes on this tone of deep humility, this honest moment of acknowledging a collective failure. A failure that's really driven by our own selfishness, our short-sightedness, and just wanting our own convenience over the health of the planet. And look, the consequences, they aren't just ideas. They are real, and they are measurable. The source points out that human activity has already caused the extinction of an estimated 150,000 species. That is a staggering number. And this isn't ancient history. The problem is happening right now. Over 2 million more species are on the brink of extinction because of what we're doing. So this really frames the moment we're in as a choice. A choice. A fork in the road, you could say. We can keep going down this path of selfishness, which leads to a suffering planet, or we can choose the path of grace. And that's a path of restoration, where we finally embrace our role as stewards and try to align our actions with the Creator's will. Okay, so what do we do? How does this path of restoration actually work? Well, it's not just some abstract idea. The source gives us a really clear, actionable framework built on 3 core responsibilities of a good steward.
But before we get to those 3 points, there's this really fascinating detail in the text that you just have to hear. In Genesis, when humanity is told to cultivate the garden, the original Hebrew word used there is the exact same word that's translated elsewhere in the Bible as to worship or to serve. Think about what that means for a second. The implication is just staggering. It means that the physical work of tending to the planet, our gardening, our conservation, our sustainable choices, can be a direct spiritual act. It connects our daily earthly tasks to the sacred. So, keeping that powerful idea in mind, here's the framework. First, we have to remember our responsibility. We're borrowers, and the earth has to be used cleanly and returned. Second, our responsibility isn't just to God, but to other people, our neighbors today and all the future generations who are going to inherit this planet. And finally, the motivation for all of it has to be love.
And this final point, it really changes everything. It reframes the whole idea from being just a list of chores or a heavy burden into a natural expression. The source argues that when we genuinely love the earth as God's creation, we will instinctively want to act responsibly. It's less about obligation and more about a heartfelt desire to protect something precious. And that's what we're left with, this really profound question to think about. What if our environmental actions, everything from recycling that bottle to advocating for conservation, what if they carry real spiritual weight? This perspective invites us to see every single act of planetary care not just as a good ethical choice, but as a potential act of worship.